Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Home Tech. I'm Seth Johnson, joined as always by Jason Grizzly. Jason, how's it going, man?
It's going great, Seth. How are you?
Good. It's been a long time since we talked, right? Like we've had this we recorded early last week and then late this week.
It's like
feels like it's been forever.
One day early last week and one day late this week, so we got a little bit of catching up to do.
Lots of news stories out there, so guess we should probably dive right into the show. But first, I think we should do this pick of the week that I found. I've been telling everybody about this today. Like everybody I meet, people at the gas station,
random people on the street.
Yeah,
anyone who will listen. Basically,
you guys have got to use this packet sender. So I was doing some programming this week, as I usually do, but this time kind of involving some messing around with some equipment. That is some of the equipment took commands with UDP packets, which are kind of special packets, and some of them took commands with TCP packets, which is most of the gear that we have takes commands with TCP packets. The UDP is kind of a special case. Anyway, I ran across this program called Packet Sender, and it is amazing. It's free, right? So it's got there's a GitHub link that we'll link to. I'll actually put the website for Packet Sender in our show notes. If you are a tech in the field and you program, like if you program with any system and you need to program to devices that use TCP, commands like hex commands, check this out. It's actually at packetsender.com. Runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. So all three of those works really, really good. The guy, I think his name is Dan. I spoke with him a little bit. He actually works over at Harman. He's one of the developers over at Harman, kind of works in the AMX area. So it makes perfect sense why this little program appeals to me so much. If you're dealing with devices and need to send TCP commands back and forth, check this thing out. This is amazing. It's got all sorts of things you can save commands in. I have a little picture here. I guess we can post in the show notes as well. It's got I have 3 commands: TV on, TV off, and HDMI 1. And there's a little send button next to those. You can save the commands and send them as you need to send them. Which is for debugging purposes, very, very, very nice. This thing, I wish I had this 10 years ago. I mean, this thing would have been great. I don't know how much programming you've had to do in the field, but usually when it gets to this point, it's like a black box for most programmers.
Yeah. Yeah, no, enough. I've done just enough to know that this sort of thing could be super useful. I saw you actually raving about it on Twitter this week. I happened to catch that, and I know you had some correspondence actually, it looked with, like you said, the gentleman who programmed it. And we probably should have prefaced this one a little bit, Seth. This is total this is nerd stuff right here, but I love it. It looks super useful. It's like you said, when you get to that point in programming a system, if something is not working correctly, a lot of times it's like you're dealing with a little black box and you have no idea what's going on in there. And this allows you to sort of open that up and get a better picture for what's there. So for anybody out there in the audience who's into programming, and you're surely familiar with those situations, you get in that tight spot into that corner and you're trying to figure out what's not working. This thing looks like it has all the bells and whistles. I got to admit, Seth, being a little bit less technical than you, I was watching some of that Twitter correspondence, and a little bit of it was over my head. I'm certainly not the most technical guy in the room. I know just enough to be dangerous, but on the surface, it does look like a very useful tool.
Yep, and really well done. The interface is super. I mean, it's nice. It doesn't crash when you run it. It's got all sorts of other advanced features that I'm not even going to go into. One of them actually is really nice. It's a subnet calculator for IPv4. Sometimes you need that, and you're got to run off to a website to figure out what the subnet calculation needs to be, and you can't get online because the router's down because you need the subnet calculation. So a lot of times it'd be great to have this on your computer and ready to run. So lots of really useful tools in this one particular program, especially if you're doing anything with like IP commands to devices. Like, because I was using this to kind of turn on and off a TV, and man, I could get it working half the time, and then something would happen, and you don't know what happens. You get this, and you make sure that it works with this, and then you can kind of move over to your program. And it's just one of those, like, if I had this 10 years ago, there are so many headaches I would have had, less headaches that I would have had in the field for sure. So if you're in the field, you do programming, get this thing. It's free, works great.
There's your nerd tip of the week, brought to you by HomeTech, and we'll move on here. Seth, just you and me this week, no guests lined up. We're gonna pick apart a number of news stories, a fairly busy week, and like you said, a bit of an extended one for us. We're a little bit off on our typical schedule here recording, so we had a couple of extra days of news to pick apart. So we're going to jump in and talk about a number of those stories. Before we do, we want to, as we always do, thank our loyal supporters here of the HomeTech Podcast. If you are interested in learning how you can support our efforts here at the show, head on over to HomeTech.fm/support. Once again, that's HomeTech.fm/support. And that's where you can learn about our Patreon program, which is a way that you can contribute to our efforts for as little as $1 a month. And we've got a bunch of people on board doing that. We really appreciate it. And Seth, I always do like to mention that even at that $1 level, we'll send you an invite to our private Slack channel, The Hub, which is a great community full of a lot of home tech professionals, a lot of enthusiasts, just a lot of people who really know their way around the smart home. And we have a great time sharing some banter and conversation in there on a daily basis. So one last time, HomeTech.fm/support if you're interested in learning more about that.
Yep. And we've got some new emoji in the hub there. Like there's a GAFA emoji.
Super important.
I just want to make sure that everybody knows. If you are in the Home Tech Slack, the hub, I've been kind of going in, putting in new little emojis for us to use during our conversations about everything. There's stuff that flies by in here, and a lot of our show notes can actually be directly linked back to some of the stuff that gets talked about in the hub. So I'd like to thank everybody who is in the hub and has helped out and decided to support the show for as little as $1 a month. We definitely do appreciate that, and want to I want to personally thank them as well. Yeah. So thank you very much.
All right, well, let's jump in here. First story we're going to just spend a couple of minutes on, because this is not what you would think of as traditional home tech news, but
it could be a home.
Really,
it costs more than a home.
It certainly could be. Yeah, it's certainly much nicer than my home. Let's see, $300 million flying home. This is on the pointsguy.com. Incredible private Dreamliner. This was at the Dubai Air Show. And I don't know what else to say about this thing other than wow. It is just absolutely incredible. A 787 that is basically just decked out, everything you can possibly imagine. If you think about a luxury private airliner, I mean, this thing is like Air Force One on steroids. It is a incredible show of luxury. And Seth, you look at this kind of thing and you think about the type of person who would be able to even consider buying it, and you just realize they live in a completely different world than most of us. And it's always interesting and fun to kind of look at it and just think about what that would be like.
Yeah, the $300 million for a 2,400 square foot house. Well, that can fly 10,000 miles, pretty much anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
At the low price, after you pay that $300 million, there's always the depreciation after you drive it off the lot, but you're also paying $70,000 per hour to keep this thing in the air. That is
amazing.
Crazy.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you just, the tech angle, you think about it as somebody like you or me or a listener to the show, you see all of the TVs, and surely there's got to be a control system and who knows what else going on inside of this airliner. And I go back to thinking about the one opportunity I had to work on a yacht. And we did a system in a yacht over in France one time, and just the tight spaces you have to work in, and a lot of the different considerations in terms of just design and reliability and support that go into working on a system like that. And this must have been a really, really interesting project for whoever the firm was that did the technology on this thing. I can't imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, I know some guys who do work on planes and yachts. Is kind of like kind of the same thing, like real tight spaces. You don't really have, you have to kind of have smaller gear. You don't really like you can look at this plane and kind of see that everything is dedicated towards the habitable areas from wall to wall. But I know that like the FAA requires certain like clearances for electronic devices to go on planes like this. So maybe a special, like we all see the UL license or the CE license. I think there's some additional licensing that has to happen for devices. And of course, the only thing that means is that they cost more. So it's the same exact device. They just have to send them through like some other certification. And of course it costs more, adding to the price of your $300 million 787 Dreamliner.
Yeah. Yeah, you get up into that ballpark, and it's just like I said, you have a hard time even picturing what that would be like to look at a jet like that and consider what it would be like to buy it. So pretty cool. Definitely head on over to check that out if you want to get outside of the normal home tech realm and just see something that's very, very cool to look at. HomeTech.fm/187. Moving on from there, Seth, we have an update about Loxone, and we had Florian on the show not too long ago. And if you're not familiar, if you missed that episode, Loxone is a company that a long-time established company over, across the pond in Europe. They've been doing a lot of great things over there, and just fairly recently came over here into the U.S. and established operations. And it was great to hear from Florian. He reached out to let us know about this new product we're going to touch on here for a second. Sounds like they're getting really good traction. I was a big fan of the company and their sort of philosophy and approach when we brought them on. And this thing is right up my alley. I love these sort of next generation control interfaces. We spend a lot of time talking about voice and tactile control on the show, but this is sort of something totally different. It's the Loxone Touch Surface is what it's called. And it comes with this like etching interface, and you've got to sort of mount it underneath. I think some of the examples they showed were like tile or different wood surfaces, and you can basically turn any sort of surface into a control interface. So some really cool pictures of this he sent over. A really, really neat product. And like I said, it's not quite like anything that I've ever seen in the smart home before.
Yeah. This is like what I would say like it's not capacitive touch because it's not glass. Like this goes behind, it can go behind stone, wood, ceramic, or glass. I don't understand. I don't have like the brain power to understand how they're doing this. This is really neat. Like they have a couple pictures like of it mounted underneath a table, and then there's a little like etching that you can kind of either a sticker that you can put on the surface or etching template that you can use. And it creates like basically a 5-button keypad that you can effectively just sit there and program those buttons to do, anything, control the lights, music, anything, blinds. So, I mean, think about that, like having a 5-button keypad completely waterproof, like in the shower, right? You could mount that behind one of the tiles somehow, have the little interface right there, and you could just press buttons, select your source, turn your volume up and down. Man, this thing is pretty awesome. $239 MSRP. I don't even know how they're doing this, but it looks really, really cool.
Yeah, like you said, one of the images they sent over shows the example of it etched into the shower. Couple like on a wood surface, like a desk. So really unique product. Thought we'd definitely give it a mention. Go check that out. I'm a fan of what they do. They take some unique angles to the smart home that I just think you don't really see out of a lot of companies. And so definitely go take a look at that. Once again, hometech.fm/187, and we'll have some links to that.
Yeah. And I think from what I can tell, there's little like activation indicators, LED indicators that you can have in there too. Like, so it can give you some kind of feedback to tell you that the buttons have been pressed. I don't know it's just a very impressive product. If you ask me, like I've never seen anything like this, remotely like this. Basalt is probably like those fancy keypads is probably the closest thing I can think of, but even that is like a keypad that's on your wall. This can be in the wall, could be part of the wall. It could be, could be your tabletop. It's just what an innovative product, I guess.
Yeah, really neat. So definitely go take a look at that. We'll move on here to the next story on our list, Seth. This is some news from Ecobee, and they're really becoming, I would say, the Swiss Army knife of smart thermostats when it comes to voice control. They now work with Google Assistant. So I think you and I were talking about it before the show. I think they've got the trifecta now, right?
Yeah, it's, to put it into horse racing terms. Yeah, they've got all three: HomeKit, Google Assistant, now Google Assistant, and they also have the integration with the Amazon Alexa platform. So they have really stepped up their game and been introducing. They've had a couple of new products recently, right? The Ecobee 4 it's fairly new. That's the one that has the Alexa thing built into it, the little small like Echo Dot thing built in. But I think this is really cool. Like this is what should happen, right? Like if you get a device that has a speaker and a microphone in it, you should be able to integrate with things like Google and Amazon voice services fairly easily. The only one that really doesn't allow you to do that is the Siri, right? Like you're not going to get Siri talking out of the Ecobee anytime soon, but you can still use your phone to kind of yell at your phone and have it control the thermostat. So I think this is great. This is really cool for a product that you may already have in your home. If you've purchased one of these, it's a software upgrade and you get Google Assistant. So very cool.
There you go. Yeah. Yep. Glad to see it. Good for Ecobee, and definitely good for, like you said, for Ecobee owners. And if you're living in that Google ecosystem, this is a big win. So go check that out. Moving on to another, probably, I arguably, Seth, I'd say the biggest story that we're touching on this week, just in terms of the amount of headlines and movement that we saw since last time we recorded, is this Logitech story related to the Harmony Link. And so we've got some backfilling to do and sort of fill in some holes, because I think the story may have broke like a day after we recorded last week, but Logitech had come out and announced that this Harmony Link, which I think has been out for about 6 years or so, is what I read. So not a brand new product, certainly, but not terribly old. And they announced that they were going to be not only discontinuing support, but it was going to effectively just die on you. They were obsoleting the product, and if you had it, it was going to become a paperweight. And I think March of 2018 is when they made that announcement that it would go dark on you. And by no major surprise, caught fire on the internet and made a major backlash. And Logitech has since responded, and now it looks like they're going to be giving a free hub now to anyone who owned the Harmony Link, and talk about just a major 180 and really an interesting conversation, because we are in that day and age now of smart home technology, where you sort of have to think about the hardware you're buying and the shelf life, and of course it gets into that bigger philosophical conversation about what responsibility do companies like Logitech have to support these products, and for how long, and there's a lot of different angles and arguments that can be made there, but this was definitely a story that really called attention to all of that.
Yeah, first, bad on Harmony for doing this. Like this really just hurts the industry as a whole, right? Because people are going to hear about this and they're going to be like, "Oh, Logitech, that company went out of their way to break a device that people had paid for." And I see these like people, the stories like, "Oh, it's a 6-year-old product, blah 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 blah. You can't expect these things to work forever, yada yada yada." Like, and evidently the Link wasn't even a very good product. Like, it was very easy to brick by itself, which as my experience, all Harmony products are like. But evidently it wasn't the best of products that they had, and I can understand them needing to kind of move away from it. But next time, guys, do it a little more gracefully. And customers have. I think the backlash was well deserved. I don't think that they had to. I don't think they had to go as far as they went and said, okay, everybody with the Harmony link will just update you to a hub. I don't think they had to go that far, but I think they could have avoided all this by offering some other way for people to continue using their Harmony link. Because I think the link is just like a Wi-Fi to IR repeater or something like that. Like it's not a very complicated product. But if they had figured out some kind of way to keep that thing online and, just working as long as they could, and maybe just announcing, the support is going to end this day, but, the product might continue working past that. I think eventually a 6-year-old product, and we've all said 6-year-old products, like they were putting these things on fire sale this year. So they were still selling these things this year on fire sale. So let's not forget that. Like that's definitely a black eye for Logitech in this situation. But I do want to kind of like touch on that last point you made where people have to kind of figure out what devices to buy, like how to buy these devices and what brands, I guess, to trust, and how long these $100, $200, $300 devices are actually going to last, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, it is kind of the reality, and it's certainly not a good thing. I agree with you, but yeah, I would say, that is that's the math you've got to be doing, right? When you're making this investment.
And I don't know if, like Stacy Higginbotham over at the IoT podcast, she has this really good idea. I think it's a good idea, bad branding, to do an expiration date on devices like IoT devices. That after this date, this device can no longer be supported by the manufacturer. You should, consider replacing it. I don't think you should call it expiration date. I think you should call it maybe like support through, or supported through this particular date.
It's like the best if used by.
Yeah, best if used by, exactly. Best if unplugged by this date. But I would say that there's something to that. Like if Harmony had come out 6 years ago and said, we've got this Link product, we really like it, but realistically we can support it for 4 years, and here's the price. I think that that people, in 4 years time, in 6 years time, the industry has massively changed. The technologies have massively changed. Like we didn't 6 years ago, we barely had iPads, right? Like it was I guess probably a little bit more than that, but like it wasn't like that. The technology we take for granted today did not exist. So obviously they have a Harmony Hub that's better. It's a better product and they believe in it more. But they can't support these older devices longer. And I think if as an industry, we figure out a way to tell people, like you see this being done with cell phones, like the Google Pixel phones, they say guaranteed support through this day, like supported updates through this particular day. If we figure out a way to do that, I think the industry as a whole would be better off, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting argument. Definitely an interesting thought exercise. I think there's a lot of challenges. It is interesting to see that a company like Google can do that with a cell phone or something, but you think about a lot of companies and they're certainly not going to put out a product with the intention of it going obsolete. Maybe Logitech never, there were problems with it when it came out that maybe they didn't anticipate, right? Who knows? But you think about a smaller company like a startup, they're never going to put out their product and say, yeah, it'll probably work for 5 years. And
if we're still around.
Yeah. So anyways, there are just some implementation things there that I don't know that we'll ever see that, but I think it is a good way to be thinking about things. And again, I don't relish in that. I think it's frankly really unfortunate that that's just sort of the nature of the consumer electronics market, is that these things are frankly sort of disposable, and that's the way that the world works these days. But thankfully, I think some of it'll be solved with software, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that already starting to happen. In fact, we had another story teed up here. Simple Control is a company that's been around for a while. I think they were previously called Roomy Remote. So if you're familiar with them, and they at one point had a hub, and they now with their version 5, Simple Control 5, is now out. My understanding of this, Seth, you and I were talking about this before we hit record today, is that they've moved away from that. So they're going all software now. I don't know if it was, you can fill in the holes here, if it was HomeKit or whatever it was, but point being, they're a company that, and you can read the story that we'll link to in the show notes. And they basically talk about exactly what we're saying right now in terms of, hey, when we came out, we had this hub and now we're doing it with software. And so I think that's a little bit of a saving grace for the smart home consumer who's looking at all of this and going, geez, where does it end? And I think the answer to that is, well, it ends with software. And you don't have to think as much about these little hardware components that you're spending $200 or $300 on, and then they're getting bricked, 5 or 6 years later.
Right. There's a couple of interesting quotes in this article. Here's what: meanwhile, there was a period when many vendors decided it was a great idea to make a hub. We know that on the show here. We had the hub bell, like we were ringing that, like it's kind of been replaced by the bell now, but we had a hub bell for so long because almost every week there was a hub coming out we could ring the bell on. So now the last year we see the industry retreat from that idea. SmartThings is now a USB stick for Samsung TVs and the NVIDIA Shield. We covered that on the show a couple of times. Philips Hue can now be controlled directly from Alexa with a Hue hub, so direct integration. And the idea that a major vendor will have their own hub is comical at this day and age. So paraphrasing a little bit there, but that's kind of the idea. Like this is, we've kind of moved on. We needed the platforms to get established. We've kind of moved on from that, especially in the DIY space. And now we are looking at those software integrations. How can this product talk to this product directly? Let's not even worry about a hub. Let's build the technology into the device that we have. In Simple Control's case, I mean, it's like an iPhone app or a TV OS app. So kind of in the Apple ecosystem, and they can leverage all of the radios and technologies that Apple has released through their software and leverage those to make essentially a hub out of an old iPad or something like that. It's kind of the idea that they are proposing to replace a hardware product that they were selling, making, and supporting. I think that this is great. This is definitely where you will see things start to go once we start getting this industry a little bit mature. And I guess we're seeing that now. Like we're seeing it. This is kind of a small way that we're seeing it, but we're definitely starting to see that to trend right now. Right.
Yep. And like you said, I think it's generally a good thing, and hopefully it'll alleviate some of that. Of course, it doesn't solve the solution of endpoints and cameras or thermostats or whatever this $100, $200 device is you're buying, and you've got to think about the shelf life on that. But point being, it does alleviate some of it, right?
Yeah, and I just had an idea for the home tech professionals that are out there. I'm just kind of like going back and looking. I made this like little home controller chart years ago that kind of has the introduction dates and the end of life dates and the no longer supported dates for Control 4 gear. And the original controllers that they released back in 2005, those lasted all the way till the mid 2014 before they end of life. So that's almost a decade that those lasted. The next controller generation lasted probably a couple of years shorter, maybe 6 or 7, almost 10 years too. So actually a little over 10 years. So like as a home tech professional, we can talk about installing products on the professional side. Yeah, you pay more for them, but they definitely have a longer life cycle, right? Like there are definitely Control 4 systems that are still out there running on the older HC300 or media control centers that are still out there running and just kind of chugging along doing their thing. Same thing with Crestron, same thing with AMX. Those systems, they were built for the long haul. And they cost more, but you definitely got a longer lifespan out of them.
Yeah, great point. Segues perfectly, Seth, into another story here that we had actually from the USA Today, which is not a publication we often pull from on the Home Tech Show here, but really interesting, the real cost of setting up a smart home. And, just touching on this story fairly quickly here, starts out by talking about, let's see, what does it say here? Based on the cost of purchasing items, trying to install them, and then giving up and paying someone else for the installation.
Do it for me.
USA Today. Yeah. USA Today estimates a figure of over $2,000 to get started with smart lighting, doorbell, lock, thermostat, and security. And again, this is one of those things where you've got to look at it from both sides, because I know for me and for presumably for you, Seth, and a lot of the professionals who listen to the show, you think 2,000 and it's like, that's nothing, right? And the story does go on to say that. Yeah, like in fairness to the USA Today, they do go on. The very next sentence says, compared to the options a few years ago, that's a bargain. So the USA Today does acknowledge that. But $2,000 is nothing to sneeze at, right? You know, you've got a lot of families out there and just trying to make ends meet. And if you want to get into the smart home and do some cool things in your house, $2,000 is nothing to sneeze at, right? So it still does cost money, and to me, the most interesting thing is right out of the gate, they sort of acknowledge that time and frustration factor that we're all so familiar with on the professional side,
right? And I do agree. I mean, 2,000. If somebody wanted to come up to me and said, "Hey, $2,000 to get this done," I mean, for me, man, that would be quite the stretch, right? But But like you were saying, and like this article admits, on the professional side, $2,000. I mean, I could barely get a Sonos system installed for that. Like that's a few years ago, I could almost barely roll a truck out for that. You know, it would be something that we had to put on the back burner and just pick up when we had. Heck, I've had service calls that were more than that, right, at the end of the day. So, like it's something to kind of consider, like how fast the prices have fallen, and then how efficient this do it for me crowd is going to get with their installs. Like we're seeing, we've talked about it many times. We're talking about Amazon coming in and setting up these devices and everything. They could easily go on to Amazon's website, pick these couple of products out, and actually have the pricing to install them, included in the price on the Amazon checkout. So I think that the efficiencies that you're seeing from Amazon are going to kind of bubble their way into the markets as a whole, and you'll see the prices come down, maybe even a little bit further than they are right now, especially for this the DIY / do it for me crowd. I think there's still some wiggle room on the pricing there.
Yep. And the article goes on to outline, a number of these point solutions that we were just talking about in that $200 to $300 range, and Ring and August and Philips Hue and Nest and on and on. So all of the usual, heavy hitters that you would expect to see. And it ends, of course, with talking about voice control, and Amazon Echo is the one they highlight here, which incidentally, Seth, we wanted to mention, and we've got Greg, one of our most loyal supporters, in the chat room with us tonight. It looks to me like the Amazon is bringing Echo and Alexa to Canada. Now, I've got to admit, I didn't realize, were they not in Canada before?
They were in very, very, very few markets. I mean, I want to say two, like Germany and American English, America. So there's really no, when you compare Amazon, which everybody likes to freak out about. I think they're in the UK now too, but when you compare Amazon to the footprint that Google Assistant and Siri have, like there's no comparison. Like Amazon really hasn't. There we are. Greg is confirming the US, UK, and Germany. So yeah, there's really no footprint that Amazon has for voice control. We talk about it here in the States quite a bit, but they don't have a worldwide footprint as big as Apple and Google at this time.
Yeah. I certainly knew that they didn't have the footprint of Google, but I foolishly assumed, and you know what they say about assuming, I guess, that it was in Canada. And it's funny, I appeared on Resi Week, the folks over at AV Nation, a couple of weeks ago, and Matt Scott, who hosts that show, is also up in Canada, and he and I were sort of joking about that actually before we recorded, how us Americans tend to forget that it's a whole different world up there in terms of product distribution and what's available. And case in point here, I got to admit, Seth, I had no idea that it was not available in Canada. So I learned something new this week.
Yep. Well, now they'll get it, and they'll get to learn how much fun. I mean, I know that there are plenty of people that have set up the Amazon Echo in Canada. I think there's a couple of tricks you can do with VPNs and that kind of thing, but the weather data doesn't come in correctly and blah, blah, blah. So there was a lot for Amazon to line up and get in place to when they introduce a system like this into a new market. And it looks like they've done that. Hopefully we'll start seeing them roll it out even further because they're definitely behind. We like to point out Amazon as one of these companies that's very progressive, but if you look at them on the worldwide stage, it's really just here in the States that they're doing all this crazy stuff. They really don't have a market everywhere else in the world.
Well, Greg is in the chat room informing me that now they've got Echo up there, and they also have running water apparently in Canada. Which
of course, the ice has to melt sometime, right?
Right. I think paved roads and electricity too up there in Canada. So
all right,
they're good. But anyways, moving on. We've got a number of stories here that we're not going to dive into each one in detail, but a handful of stories, Seth, came out on streaming video this week, which has been a big topic for us this year on the show and in general in the tech world. Probably the biggest one is Amazon reportedly ditching plans to offer a bundle of their own, a cable TV bundle, because it's, quote, still too expensive. This I'm reading from The Verge. It says Amazon is shelving plans to introduce a pay TV bundle over concerns it can't reliably turn a profit with the service, according to a report today from Reuters. So Reuters appears to have gotten the original story here. The service was to be a part of Amazon Channels, the company's current cable subscription offering that lets users subscribe to HBO, Showtime, and Amazon's new anime streaming service, among more than 100 other cable and digital-only networks. So there you have it. Apparently Amazon, I know we've talked numerous times, Seth, on the show about Apple, has made a few forays into this space and has reportedly at least tried to get into doing some sort of bundle or skinny bundle, as some have called it, and has not been able to make that happen. And it appears Amazon has run into some of the same roadblocks. So still a number of challenges, even for the largest companies out there who have the most leverage you could imagine in these sort of negotiations to try and go out and make this happen.
Yeah, I mean we're looking at large companies, but also remember that the entertainment and content creation industry is fairly large as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but I think what you're seeing more recently, because Apple was reportedly trying to get this done early on, right? They were trying to come up with some kind of, reportedly trying to come up with some kind of TV service fairly early on in the game. Since then, we've seen a number of other companies come out, DirecTV, Sling TV, YouTube is actually pretty good these days, but all of them are floating around that like $35 mark. And the too expensive, yeah. I mean, like it's definitely more than I want to pay for one or two channels that I'm probably going to watch. Like I'm not really just kind of want to pick up the couple of shows that I want to see. And it's kind of, right now it's kind of spread across a bunch of different networks. So it's still very tough to get anything outside of cable. This conversation actually came up this week at my house, where my wife wants to get the Hallmark channel for all the Christmas movies that have come out, because that's what happens this time of year. It's very hard to get just the Hallmark channel. There's only two places that you can get it. One is Sling TV, and it's an add-on channel. And the other one was DirecTV Now, I believe. And it was on the $35 plan. And I told her, it's $35 a month and we can get all these other channels. She's like, I don't want those. I just want that one. So I don't think we're going to have Hallmark Channel Christmas movies this year, but
what a bummer.
Yeah, too bad.
What a bummer.
You can hear the disappointment in my voice. I think it's I think what you're going to see is and we're seeing this now. Apple has announced that they're going to spend $1 billion on content creation. Netflix is up to $8 billion on content creation and acquiring content to be on their network. I think we're going to see the rise of these kind of services, maybe even replacing like the networks. Like if you think about 10 years ago, Where were you going to watch TV? You're probably watching Survivor. You're probably watching maybe, I don't know, Seinfeld a little bit more than 10 years ago, but like you were watching TV shows that were on channels, right? Like they were on network channels, and the content was created and bought and paid for by those network channels to show up on your TV. And now I think what's going to happen is, since they can't get these deals made, they still want to have the content. Like Apple and Amazon and Netflix, they all have money. They're just going to just throw money at the content creators and say, hey, you want to come over here? Here's a bunch of money. Come play. You can do whatever you want. And that's what that's why we're in like this golden age of television, is because these both like HBO networks, and they're just paying money to really good directors and actors and having them do their thing.
Yeah. Original programming.
We're getting this really good quality original programming. And I think, I wonder if there's going to be a day where we're not talking about CBS, NBC. We're talking about Apple, Amazon, and Netflix. Like it's kind of weird to think about, but it's definitely a way this could go.
Yeah, I certainly think we're already seeing the signs of that. I don't know if it'll ever be to the complete exclusion of companies like CBS or these other big names out there. But yeah, certainly already I would say that you're seeing that in conversations about Netflix versus HBO and who has the better miniseries, and those conversations just weren't happening 5 to 10 short years ago. So yeah, it's already happening. And Seth, while you were talking there, Sling, you mentioned Sling, or we were kind of joking about that, but they added a couple of quick numbers I want to throw out here. Sling TV added 240,000 subscribers in Q3, according to a report. And then jumping over to a different story here from Fierce Cable, cord cutting in Q3. It says the 10 largest public pay TV platforms lost just under 400,000 subscribers. And this says with VMVPDs. So that's a virtual, those are basically streaming services by these subscribers. So you've got a company like DirecTV, for instance. And I think what they're doing there is they're basically saying, okay, they lost this many subscribers on their core business or their traditional model, but they added this many on DirecTV Now. So what is the net loss, right? And it's still a net loss of 400,000 as I'm reading this. And so some really interesting numbers. It says Dish Network reported a gain of 16,000, but they are refusing to publicly parse the gains made by Sling TV with the continued degradation of its core satellite business. And then the last number I want to throw out here, AT&T reported that DirecTV Now gained 296,000 users. So DirecTV Now up just about 300,000 users in the third quarter, offsetting losses of 251,000 for DirecTV and 134,000 for Uverse. So a net loss there. So anyways, a lot of numbers I threw out there, and I know, but the point being, you're seeing this shift over from traditional subscription pay TV very prominently over into these new models, and it's just fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it definitely is. I wonder. This is one of those things, like you said, it's something to watch, because there's no way that you and I are going to sit here and be able to predict how this is all going to end up. There's way too many moving parts, way too many people with their trying to get their finger into the pie. The pie being our back pockets, I guess. But there's just way too much money involved here to try and realistically figure out where this all could go. But you step back and you look at a company like Amazon, you look at a company like Apple, who keeps having these great quarters and has billions of dollars in cash. They could do something serious with that one day. And that could be buying an entire network channel to satisfy their needs to make content for their streaming service. So it's crazy to think about, but that's definitely where we could be in a few short years.
Yeah. Yep. Really interesting landscape to watch, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it here. One last story we wanted to touch on this week related to HDR, and this one I think particularly important with the holiday season coming up. And Seth, I think you and I are going to try to do maybe a Black Friday special next week. I cannot believe it, but Thanksgiving is basically upon us, and so we'll probably spend a little bit of time analyzing what's out there. And this is typically the time of year, if we're going to do it, that we talk about TVs And this story points out that HDR may not be all it's cracked up to be in terms of what you see on the label. So you've got to be a little bit careful about what you're buying. I think that for the most part, if you stick with reputable brands, I think you'll be okay. I've got to admit, I haven't completely dissected and read between the lines of this story, but the main point of it being there is this sort of brand of quote unquote fake HDR where really for a TV to put HDR, for a TV maker, I should say, to put HDR on the box, it doesn't technically mean that they have to be able to display HDR. It just means effectively that the software has to be able to decode it. So the picture doesn't have to be objectively or measurably better than SDR or standard dynamic range, and they can still put HDR on the box, which is surprising and disappointing to read. And so we'll have to dissect this a little bit more. And anyone out there thinking about a new TV for the holiday season, I think should definitely be aware of this, because to me, HDR is really the big thing. I'm much more jazzed on it and excited about it than I ever really was for 4K. And so this is definitely something to be conscious of.
2017, the year of fake news and fake HDR, right? Yeah. Like, what
right.
What a year, man! What a year!
Right.
So yeah, I mean, this is like a buyer beware story. We'll put a link to this article in the show notes. It's got a couple of like recommendations. But the deal is, like, on here, I'll read a quote: "To truly support and show HDR content, the real HDR TV needs to have true local dimming, edge lit, or full array." Those are kind of technical terms, but for LCD, lighting up an LCD. But it has to have those. Wide color gamut support, and it has to produce highlights of 500 to 600 nits or brighter, and that nits is a measurement of brightness. And evidently, there's TVs that say HDR on them, but they don't come quite close to those particular specs. And when I say when you were talking about the fake HDR TVs, they're estimating 9.4 million of them have been shipped and sold to people who think they bought a 4K HDR TV, and they probably haven't. And this article is pretty good because they go into some like things, how to avoid getting burned. You can go ahead and parse, like you said, parse through this yourself. But I mean, it comes down to model numbers, like the TCL, which is, I've heard of TCL. It's kind of like one of those off brands. But TCL P605 and 607 are great. They have HDR perfectly just fine. But the S405, same brand, says it's HDR, but it's actually fake HDR. You buy that TV, it's not going to look. You're going to buy that TV, buy the Apple TV 4K, try and do HDR on it, and it's just going to look like your regular TV. And like you were saying, you're excited about HDR. HDR is the only reason to buy a new TV right now. If it doesn't support real HDR, if it's not one of these TVs that they list here, I would definitely not buy it, because it's not. You're going to get 4K, and that's great. That's the number of pixels. But you want quality pixels, and if you have 4K bad pixels, it's not going to be nice, not going to be good. It's just a waste of money at this point. I stick with the 1080p TV until you can get a 4K with true HDR.
Right. So, like you said, that's our buyer beware story for the week. I guess we actually had a couple of them in there with if you count the Logitech story, but. All in all, good stuff here, Seth. We'll definitely look forward to reconnecting next week. If you probably probably noticed my audio quality wasn't where it typically is. I'm actually traveling, so out in New York with the in-laws here this week, and we're out here for an extended trip celebrating my daughter's third birthday
Holy
tomorrow.
Cow.
Seth, if you can believe that.
No, I can't. No.
We announced the birth of my daughter. It feels like just, very short time ago here on the show, and so we've been at it for a while, and yeah, she's turning 3, so we're out here celebrating that. We'll be out here for Thanksgiving as well. I'm going to go spend a little bit of time in Boston with the One Vision team, so it'll be a nice trip, but definitely look forward to connecting next week and getting another show out there, and want to once again thank everybody who has supported the show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're interested once again in supporting us here at the podcast, it's HomeTech.fm/support.
Yep, absolutely. Well, with that, Jason, you go have a great vacation, man. That sounds like you're going to have a blast up there.
Yeah, it'll be nice. We got my wife and I don't have family back in Colorado, so it's nice to to come out and hang out with the family and, gosh, get some built-in babysitting, a little bit of a break.
So nice. So nice.
Yeah, so we'll enjoy that. But yep, glad we got to connect tonight. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll look forward to reconnecting again with you next week.
Sounds good.
All right, take care, Seth.